Welcome back to Winning the Room. We're here with Julie Eckersley and we're talking about the changing media landscape. And oh my goodness, is it changing? It is almost unrecognisable to what it was just 12 months ago. What a fantastic conversation. When I reflect on my youth, I remember Tarzan on the telly. And I would sit there with Dad, and I'm damn sure he wasn't enjoying it, but he would endure Tarzan on the weekend and we would watch it. And I still remember saying to him, when I grow up, I'm just going to watch TV the whole time and it's going to be cool because I'm going to be the master of my own domain. Because he would obviously, at the end of Tarzan, kick me outside and, go and do something outside. And there was no other screen to look at, so off I went. Thinking about today, clearly there's not one screen, there's many. There's not one thing to watch. There's all sorts of idiosyncrasies of things. How do you see the current media landscape and what's changed?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great point of reference, right? From the family sitting around the television to this many screen dimension that we've got. And I've got a daughter who's nearly 8 and she watches her iPad, but she'll put the show that she's watching up into the corner and she's playing a game. This is a whole generational change. And the buzzword that we're hearing is fragmentation. That's what everyone's talking about. We've gone from this one central campfire where, and you could then have gone to school the next day and gone, did you see what Tarzan did? And, then you're interacting with it to just, that's changed.
What's going on in the TV world? Is anyone watching? And does it matter? Does it matter that we seem to be little fragmented?
So, if you look at 10 years ago till now, it was 10 years that since Stan started in Australia, Netflix came to Australia, and really since we started to see that move from broadcast television into streaming. That was the first big change. So from there, we've now got so many platforms to engage with content, and people can not like that word, but that's what it is, essentially. I spoke recently with Professor Amanda Lotz, and she's a real leader in this space, and she talks about the end of mass media and the rise of micro or niche media. What that means is, when all I could watch is 7, 9 or 10, I had to put up with stuff. I don't love it, but I'll watch it because it's what's on and the television's on in the background. And so you got bigger audiences watching one thing just because we were tolerating it, essentially. But now there's so many choices. If I don't like it, I'm flicking up on my feed or I'm turning it off and so increasingly in that, because now we've got so many more distribution models, you no longer have to go to a gatekeeper at a network or at a newspaper to get your story out there. You can literally self-publish. So there's so much more content out there and people are finding niches that serve them a lot more. Where that doesn't work with television is that television, as we know it, broadcast, was built on this idea that you can spend this much money on it because you're going to get 1 million people watching it. So how much money can you spend on it if that audience is no longer guaranteed? These are some of the things that the industry is working through.
Yeah. And do you think quality of content has gone up or gone down since this fragmentation piece?
I think quality is a really interesting question because I think it's gone up and down and sideways. When we're in the broadcast era, it was sort of least objectionable, right? So was the quality great when, you were creating endless episodes, 50 episodes a year? Probably not. Then we had this streaming era, this kind of HBO,
Sopranos.
Yeah. But then it turns out that not everyone wants to watch that all the time. And actually people do like watching content that is maybe not as intellectually challenging or not as complex because they just want entertainment. And so now when you look at the many platforms that have come up, if you look at what gets attention and what entertains people on TikTok, that is a deliberately raw platform. If you put something that is
raw's a good way to describe it.
Yeah, but that's what people are relating to. Even on YouTube. I was watching a clip yesterday from Emma Chamberlain, one of the biggest influencers, and it had over 1 million views in a day, so many views, and it was her saying, "It's my birthday and I'm making a cake because I don't want to cry." that, and it was beautifully shot, but it was very different to a structured script that someone slaves over. Is it worse quality? Well, I mean, this is an audience-facing art form. So who can say that that's not quality? That is it's resonating with an audience. So within that world of YouTube, that is absolutely quality. If you put that on HBO and someone came with an expectation they were going to see Sopranos, that might be jarring. But all these different variations have come out, and I think we just need to accept that this is audiences are speaking.
And that definition of quality is very interesting, because is it eyeballs? Is it theatrical performance? Is it the way it's shot? There's something interesting in that. And I guess the arbiter of quality is eyeballs, right? How many people are watching it?
I think what needs to be considered in this is why people are watching. I think that television got a little out of touch with what people were experiencing in their lives. It got a little too shiny, and it got a little too organized, and actually, broadening this idea of quality. What people are saying is they want community, they want real people, and they want to feel part of something.
Yeah. And I guess if people are getting their human connection, in inverted commas, from that show, what's the urgency to go out there and have a real human connection? Like, I can't state the stats, but I've heard the stats. The amount of people that are out there actually meeting someone in the real world for the first time. Number of people who've actually asked someone out on a date. I'm talking about young people. These numbers are going down. Is that because they're getting what they need from, I don't know, a YouTube person they follow, or, God forbid, something on OnlyFans, like something that they feel connected. They feel like they're in a relationship with something and someone. Therefore, maybe I don't need to go outside and figure it out for myself and get a couple of knockbacks.
Yeah, I've heard some really interesting people talking about the biggest threat to American democracy is disenfranchised young men who are spending too much time, in their cellar playing games and watching porn, and not enough time going out there accepting that the knockbacks are part of how you meet someone, and that actually, that's part of the human journey, that it can be really challenging but really rewarding as well.
Yeah.
But a bit scary.
Yeah. Look, God, I just feel so old-fashioned, but I don't know, man. Like, human connection is so important. I reckon it's how we learn. I reckon it's how we figure out who we want to be, by connecting with others, understanding other people's journeys, and then thinking, oh, interesting, I could take a bit of that and form it with a bit of this. Like, all that stuff happens in the real world. Screens, I just think it's a layer in between, potentially multiple layers in between that. I think that's dangerous.
Well, I hear all of that and I kind of agree with it, but I'm just going to throw some things, your way. One is, I think this is going to be interesting to see, people are now talking about the end of the mobile phone, right? There's been a lot of discussion recently about that. And there was a TED talk I saw recently about people putting on their glasses. And I don't know if you've seen that, but those glasses are amazing. They're very much out and about. So I guess, we can kind of get down in the dumps and, about those things, but also things keep changing. I was listening to the CEO of Snapchat talk on Colin and Samir's great podcast, and he was saying his vision of the future is that, he sees the kids running around in the backyard with their glasses on, and he's like, I wish those damn kids would get off the internet. They're running around. So I guess I'd just say, to counter what you're saying, of course, personal agency, if you choose to be on your phone rather than create a human connection, I mean, might not be great, but we have free will, right? But I do think these things are going to keep transforming.
Yeah. I don't know. It feels like there must be some social responsibility when it comes to this stuff.
Well,
because it's designed to be addictive,
that's true.
right?
And we remember how prevalent smoking used to be. It used to be everywhere, every club, and there were regulations that were put in that have helped people make different choices. I think we absolutely see that, and I think the regulations that Australia brought in so that social media is not legal for people under 16. I think those things are really helpful. I guess that's our young people, and helping.
That's how I'm most concerned about. Right?
Yeah.
I think Yeah. Young minds and screens feels very dangerous to me.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
100%. Like, keeping my daughter off social media for as long as is humanly possible is a really high priority for me as a parent.
Yeah. And do you think big television groups or even big content groups, what's their responsibility in this world, do you think, when it comes to this?
That's such a good question. I mean, I think there's a lot of talk about corporate responsibility, but then there's shareholders, right?
Mm.
So,
Yep.
who wins out in that? And then when you have leadership changes, a bit like we're seeing in America at the moment, where they start, taking things that have been decided were important, whether it's environment or diversity and inclusion, off the agenda, you see how quickly corporations sort of change their tune. So,
A very scary snapback.
yeah, that's right. That's right. So,
Makes you question a lot of things.
yeah, is corporate responsibility a thing? In my opinion, it is. But, where's the world at the moment? What do you think about that?
I think we've become money obsessed and status obsessed. And I think social media is a big part of it. It's driving that. How many non-successful stories do you see or hear about on social media? Very few, if any. I think most of it is success stories, very financially driven. And yeah, I think people are chasing money now more than ever. And I think that's a bit scary, especially if it's done in an isolated, lonely way. So back when we had just a few channels to pick from, things would happen and they would hit the zeitgeist. Now, total fragmentation, and it's very few and far between these things hit. Mr. Beast is a great example of that. Well, why do these things hit?
Well, to answer that, I first just want to sort of take a bit of the gloss off the way things used to be. Because when we had, 3 or, 5 channels, 7, 9, 10, ABC and SBS, there were gatekeepers making decisions about what we watched. So it wasn't just the organic zeitgeist, it was some people deciding what was in the zeitgeist. So now there's a lot more voices, there's a lot less power for the gatekeepers. I think we are seeing less of those kind of moments. Actually, interestingly, at the moment, they're mainly coming through sport, which is why we're seeing the streamers really having a battle for sports rights. They've gone through the roof. I think the last big collective moment you could say Australia had in its media was the Matildas. So, you know, again, I'm trying not to be too Pollyanna about it because I know what you're saying, but the idea that you had to somehow be perfect on television was pretty prevalent. That you had to be perfect, probably in our culture, white. Like that was a real thing. Like that were no glory days on one level. So, yeah, there's going to be some of this. There's going to be some of influencers, but also what I'm seeing now is influencers is a term that's being used less because they're creators. Like I talked to the McFarlane brothers the other day who are have had 50 million views on their site. They're Australian and they're showrunners. They've come up through YouTube, but the way that they craft and tell story and get millions of views is really amazing and really high craft. So more of everything is what I'm saying.
But aren't they just the new gatekeepers?
Well,
right, they've now got the audience, and in actual fact, that audience is easier to hold on to, right? Once you've got, let's call it 1 million followers, you've now got a channel that can't really go away, right? Like back in the day, 5 networks, every day, every episode was a fight. Now, Kardashian's a perfect example. They've got the mass in followers that they have an always on channel, kind of no matter what. And you can't really take it away from them.
I disagree. If you're on a channel like YouTube or, those channels, the amount of information you get about when your audience is there, when they drop off, if they fall, you can really have that. And I mean, you don't get paid unless you get views. So YouTube is certainly not set and forget. All the time, the people that I know that are doing that well, they're building, they're listening, they're going, when did that work? When didn't it? So it's really a rigorous conversation with their audience and they have to keep serving that beast.
I agree YouTubers need to keep serving the beast, but I also know that the thumbnail matters.
Yeah.
The short before the content matters. All these other cues that it's basically clickbait, for want of a better word, that gets an audience in, right? That sort of tricks the algorithm. So there's a lot of that going on as well.
Well, again, I'm just going to be a bit of a provocateur here. I mean, it's a different art form of storytelling. When we had the legacy or traditional model of television, it was all about writing to that ad break and you had to hook them. Well, I'd just say the structure's inverted. Now you've got to get them, like if you're on YouTube, you've got to get them in that thumbnail. That's absolutely a new art form. And then you've got to get them in the first 10 seconds because they've clicked, and now you've got to get them. But within the first 30 seconds or a minute, you've got to deliver on the promise of that clip and tell them that you're going to deliver on whatever they signed up for. Otherwise, they're going to go away. So it's not just about clickbait. I think I don't think people get rewarded over time. They need to actually deliver on the promise. So the story structure has changed.
Yep.
But, it's that idea of quality. Like, is it less quality, or is writing to an ad break, not great quality if you want to put it in those terms?
Yeah. So now imagine that person, they figured out the way to do the thumbnail. They figured out the way to hook the person in the first 10 seconds and taken us on a longer journey that keeps me involved and I do a complete. And that's the person who I can connect with all the time, in my palm, on my commute, on the way back from school, in a social setting with other people. Is that now what we're going to describe as human connection? And if it replaces real human connection, screened down, having a real conversation, oh gosh, it's a bit awkward. I don't really know what to say like this eye to eye with someone. That I guess is almost like the premise for the reason why I'm doing this podcast. I've got a real issue with that. I've got an issue with that is human connection versus this is human connection. They're vastly different. One takes effort, one has resistance, one is exploratory, you learn, you find out new things about yourself and others. This is, to me, passive. It's too easy. It's too convenient. I think that's dangerous.
Yes, and. I'm going to say because I think that it's growing. It's more. These parasocial relationships are one thing. Before, you'd watch a television show. There was no way you could have any connection with anyone who made that show. Like, you might see an article in TV Week, but that was it, hands off. And now there is, if you're on those platforms like YouTube or Patreon or, TikTok, there's a sense that you can have a conversation, but it's not a real conversation, And I don't think, not for me personally, I don't know about generations coming up, and I guess that is something to be aware of, but it's an addition. Like, it's another way to connect. I never really particularly felt seen in the old model. I know lots of people, and, having worked at SBS in the diversity and inclusion space, it was a real pain point for a lot of people that they never saw anyone who looked like them or spoke like them, on that screen. And now that's changed. There's a lot more queer content and content from many, many different places. And because you can put stuff on YouTube and it goes to a global audience, you can actually, see content made in India and in much more simply, right? So I would say it's become part of our ways of connecting, but absolutely face-to-face person, like that's a very important and can be intense and uncomfortable and clunky part of the human experience. I would miss that.
Me too. It's funny, when I extrapolate this to the business world, I watch, and I'm going to call them young people, but let's call them 25-year-olds, right? So went to school, then uni, came out, COVID, awesome, isolated. Fast forward to today, they're relatively inexperienced. They haven't had those in-person moments. There's a huge deficit. And I think that's a huge problem that I just see just in Australia within the business setting. How important is presenting and selling your idea? And I guess I'm maybe channeling back to your days as a commissioner. how important is it for that script or that idea to jump off the page when someone presents it to you? Or is it enough just to be a great idea that you get sent?
Oh, yeah, it's so important. In fact, one of the things coming out of SBS, I had the great privilege of seeing pretty much everyone in Australia pitch, who's in the television industry.
So cool.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. But what it sort of left me with is a feeling of how important that is. Like that you can have a great script, but if you can't communicate it, and you have to communicate it numerous times, you have to empower and engage people in this idea that you've got. So I've been doing a lot of coaching and working with different people on how to do that, and really starting to think about how you communicate those ideas. And a couple of things that I look at are, firstly, there's like 3 golden rules. It's firstly, like, you've got to tell a great story, and I'll come back to that in a sec because that's a bit more complicated than people anticipate. You've got to also sell that you are the right person to deliver on that story. And then the third thing is it's got to be a match for that person or that company or that business. So those are the kind of 3 globals that I think you really need to look at. But then if you dig down into that first one, I think a mistake that a lot of people, certainly in the television industry, and I'm not sure if it's the same in the business industry, make when they're pitching, is they can talk about the idea but not actually emotionally engage someone in the idea. So, I mean, let me give you an example. Say I'm coming to pitch to you and I've got this idea. It's called Little Red Riding Hood. And if I'm telling you about the idea, I'll intellectualize it. So I'll be like, it's a television series. It's a 6x1 hour horror. And it starts with this girl called Little Red Riding Hood, and she goes into a forest. And in that forest, she has to go through the forest. So it's sort of, it's kind of cold.
It's descriptive.
Yeah, it's descriptive. And because pitching is scary, a lot of people stay in that space and they think that's going to do the job, but it isn't. But if you then go into the story and take someone into the story, so you say, this is a horror story that goes right to the core of whether people are telling us the truth or not. We start in this forest, trees so high you can't even see the ceiling. And we zoom in on this little tiny red dot. And as we get closer, we realise it's a 13-year-old girl, and she's holding a basket in her hand and her hand is shaking, and someone reaches out from behind her and pushes her into the forest and says, then kind of the same story, right?
Yeah.
But in one, I'm taking you into the story world so you get a sense of, my vision and the feeling, and I start to pull on your emotions, which essentially, we're not really in the entertainment business. We're in the emotions business. That's the business we're doing with each other. How can I play with your emotions in terms of a way that is satisfying and exciting for you and give you an experience? So yeah, they're some of the things that I've really found people can challenge themselves when they're pitching an idea and developing.
I have so many reactions to what you just did.
Do you?
Number one, great reactions. Number one, yeah, the content changed, but the way you delivered it changed. Yeah. You leaned in, more pausing. There was a voice modulation that came in, right? A lower tone. There was gravitas was given to the moment. And I guess this is my whole thesis around live interactions. Most people aren't aware enough to even do that. So you could give them that content. Tall trees, 1 dot, we zoom in, but they don't, all the other things you brought to it. So it's a combination of that magic.
Yeah, and it's things like, these are this kind of the instrumental craft things of going, like you say, tone of voice. How do you use pause? And I know that you're really powerful in terms of how you use your pauses, but also things like a moment of warmth and a moment of heart and a smile.
Smile, so important.
There's this great podcast called Bulletproof Screenwriting, and Neil Landau, who used to teach at UCLA, one of the best screenwriting universities in the world, he talks in the middle of this, episode 333, if anyone wants to go to it, and right in the middle of the podcast, he talks about how he teaches the students at UCLA to pitch their television shows, right? And he uses the example of stand-up comedians and talks about a tight 10. You know, when you're starting out as a stand-up comedian, you just got to get those 10 minutes down. So I think that's also a really great example of like how much you need to rehearse a pitch. But one of the things he said that absolutely fascinated me, and he's so right, he said, if you've got your tight 10, at 3 moments within that 10 minutes, you need to stop and you need to draw people into the emotion. So again, don't just ride over the top of it, but if you're there and you're like, and Little Red Riding Hood, she's feeling like this, you know, and that is also how you really land an idea for someone.
Yeah, I like that idea of stopping. Something that I do and I try and get clients of mine to do, I call it the double back. So it's more than just a stop. Funnily enough, I did it yesterday in a pitch. We presented this idea that was pretty provocative amongst a bunch of data. The client sort of registered it, but nodded on, and we kept going. I pulled the meeting up and I was like, just before we move on, I just want to go back to that idea. And I want to make sure, well, firstly, did you hear it? And secondly, have you heard it articulated like that? So it was pretty damn provocative talking to the executive team like that. Anyway, so I did a big double back and went back to it. And it was the chat that had to happen, because at that point, a few people said, yeah, you know what? I kind of got a bit angry at that point. And then somebody else said, you know, I've never heard about it like that, and I'm not even sure if it's true. And that then gave myself and my team the chance to go, well, let us just explain. So it was a little bit of pushback, but then appreciation. You just forget that people go through information, or even meaningful information, and we want to be agreeable. We want to sort of, you know, nothing uncomfortable here. We sort of nod on. And if you don't hold your audience to account, stop and potentially double back, which I know takes a little bit of whatever, guts or stupidity. If you double back, that's when you have a different and more important conversation.
Interesting. And something else I hear in that, I think, along with story coming back into fashion, for want of a better word, I think we need to really think about emotions in the workplace, because we've trained leaders to be so rational. But what you did then is you went back and you brought up some emotions for people.
Yeah.
And if you hadn't been able to be in that space, you could have also got activated. That's why, you know, we really need to teach our leaders to be able to be in emotional places if they want to have breakthroughs.
Thanks for listening to this episode. It's a really important conversation that needs to happen, and you can find us anywhere where you get high-quality podcasts. If you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did, make sure you check out the next episode.